Welcome to Third Floor Views, a projection of Chesapeake family life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. This episode is sponsored by Annapolis Pediatrics. For more than 70 years, Annapolis Pediatrics has provided exceptional healthcare to infants, children, adolescents, and young adults in Annapolis and the surrounding communities. They have over 30 physicians and nurse practitioners to serve your family, and now in 6 locations: Annapolis, Crofton, Edgewater, Severna Park, Kent Island, and Pasadena. Learn more about Annapolis Pediatrics and find helpful parenting resources, videos, and more at AnnapolisPediatrics.com. So today we're talking about athletes and mental health, and joining us is Dr. David Barron, Senior Vice President and Provost of the Western University of Health Sciences. Dr. Barron is one of the most critical minds in the worlds of sports psychiatry. And in addition, Dr. Barron has conducted extensive research on subclinical concussions and brain injuries to athletes. His study aims to develop more sensitive, user-friendly screening instruments and methods and increase public awareness of the problems facing student athletes today. So thank you so much, Dr. Barron, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To our viewers, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the comment section and we will get to those as we can. Let's get started. So Dr. Barron, let's get an overall picture. What is the health crisis that young athletes are facing today?
Well, there's a number of things. I just came back from doing sports psychiatry programs in Egypt and Malaysia. And it's amazing to me when you see how things are so much the same, given these are third world countries. And what we're seeing is there are a couple of important issues. Obviously, as you mentioned, I have an interest in sports concussion or repetitive brain impacts, which has been, a hot topic now for 2 decades. And so we're interested in that. And I actually even made a movie about that in youth sports called Next Week's Game. But what I think we're seeing is the important role that organized sports play for kids, but there's a flip side of that coin. So we're seeing, my wife's a high school sports coach. We're seeing issues with young kids being pushed too hard by their parents, and we're actually seeing youth burnout of athletes, at a young age, early teens, where you still see the cyberbullying that can sometimes take place in sports. And I think that there are so many more positive things that I think youth participation is terrific, but I think we need to acknowledge that there can be some challenges and a downside, and it's important to address those so that we make sure that the impact on our children developing, whether they're from the young age 3, 4, 5, on the Pee Wee leagues, all the way up to the Olympic and the professional levels, that we're aware of the importance of health and mental health, and having this be a positive part of their development, and make sure we address any of the potential issues that could have a more negative effect.
Right. Now, are you seeing this in college? Are you seeing these challenges pop up in high school or even beyond? I know that it was a really challenging spring. There are a lot of really tragic suicides that happened at the university level. And what do you make of that in terms of when this pops up developmentally? Are you seeing it all over the place, or is it really at that collegiate level?
No, unfortunately, it's really not. We see, and I'm involved with a couple of groups. So most of my clinical practice is focused on either my academics, but really on sports and mental health issues, both here and abroad. And we're even seeing, as young as 6, 7, 8-year-olds. And what we see is sometimes the pressure, the kids are playing because they want to please mom and dad, or they really don't want to, or, there are many kind of, social aspects of it. So again, I think sports can have a tremendous, and I know it can have a very positive effect on not only physical, but emotional and, psychological development. But we're seeing issues, it ties in with sports and on online bullying, again, with the head impacts. So it's unfortunately, it's not at all, unfortunately, just limited to high school, college, professional, semi-pro, but we're seeing it in the youth leagues. What I have been encouraged is that many of the youth leagues are now requiring youth coaches to at least have a background understanding of kind of mental health issues. That was not the case. I coach youth sports. I coached my kids when they were growing up. And it was almost always, it was a parent of one of the players whose kid was on the team. And there wasn't much of an appreciation of some of the issues. And I think we're seeing some improvement in the right direction on that, but it clearly is not restricted just to high school, college, and beyond.
So what do you think some of these main causes are to these mental health challenges with kids? Is it because of the pandemic? Is it because of parental pressure? Like, what are some of the biggest factors that are leading to this?
Well, the pandemic, I think, clearly had an issue. I know my wife was telling me when her girls lacrosse team, they had been away, the close down from the pandemic, when they had their first practice together, the girls were literally crying because they'd seen their teammates on Zoom, but it's not the same as being there and, being able to give each other a hug and that. So I think that there were some issues clearly with the pandemic. I've said all along, I think the greatest negative impact of the pandemic looking forward is not going to be the physical and the tragic, million deaths or so that we had here, but it's the emotional effect that it had, that, the isolation, the loneliness. I've ran into kids, younger kids who spent 2 years with no interaction, and it really had an impact on their emotional development. What I think that, that we're seeing is too often we're taking the joy and the fun out of youth sports. It's everyone's thinking about, well, I want to get a college scholarship because tuitions are through the roof. And you see these kids whose parents or the kids themselves feel like, well, this is a way that they'll get to, to maybe a better school or get to college at all. Right. So I think one of the things that hopefully we can get back to is, again, engaging in sports, being competitive, but really understanding this should be fun. This should be enjoyable. And hard work and teamwork is, that can be a whole lot of fun. So I think that's one of the things I've seen is this general anxiety and, that people have seen that as a carryover from some of the COVID related issues, is that I think we need to kind of refocus as a society, as a public health issue, not a mental health issue, is having kids be engaged in sports that they enjoy, that they're having fun with. And I think if we do that, we can address a lot of these issues that I've seen, before COVID, but I've clearly gotten, I think, exacerbated since the return, over the last number of months.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Anxiety has certainly gone up in, I think, all populations because of COVID. So one of the other things that I thought was particularly interesting, that you noted in your work, is that you're seeing a lot of young female athletes really impacted by this. Is that happening? Is that common? Is it more in women than in men? And why? Why are we seeing girls impacted so much by mental health?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues. So just by way of full disclosure, I've been Doc involved with the Olympics since 1984. So we've been involved with in fact, we had even threatened child abuse against some countries for particularly the gymnasts and some, we have these very young kids, the movie that's out now, Icarus on doping, with the state-sponsored doping. And, they had the CNN special with the Larry Nassar story, right, and with, the Caroli. So I think there are some unique issues that girls and young women have. Unfortunately, the things that make the headlines are the sexual abuse, again, the just horrible, and they haven't really gone away. But in the youth sports, I've actually seen over the years, so I've been over 40 years involved in this field now, is sometimes young girls can be sometimes a little bit more mean when they're younger than the young guys. And again, you hate to overgeneralize, but the social aspect, I've seen girls bond on teams together. I mean, if you even go to collegiate events, the girls will do, team cheers together, and I go to all the a lot of the USC women's events. So I think there are some unique issues in girls and in young women, kind of balancing the role between being identified as an athlete and yet still wanting to be, how society sometimes defines a young girl. They want to, girls coming to practice with eye makeup, and you wouldn't see guys coming, with that, obviously. So I believe there are some unique stressors for girls and young women in their identity of wanting to be an athlete, and being an athlete, and then how that jives with then being, feminine. And I put that in quotes because, I think some of the elite athletes I take care of, women athletes, are absolutely feminine, yet they're built better than I am now. So I think there is maybe a bit more of that struggle, not in all, but in some young girls on, boyfriends, and do I want to play that quote, that, that feminine role, which I think is evolving in a good way.
What, as a parent, what do you think parents should know and watch for when we're talking about kids being challenged with their emotional health? And what are some red flags that parents should really know about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that really maybe is the key take home to this whole session. One of the things I think is important for parents is to make sure, show support, get there whenever you can. I mean, obviously work schedule, sometimes you can't get to every game, other things are going on, but let your child know that you support them in this. And that I think I always tell my parents when I was coaching, I said, listen, I can't control what you do at home, but when you're on the field, you will not be allowed to berate your child or any other child. I'll ask you to leave. Because oftentimes you see parents living out, their own youth sports fantasies through their kids. So I think asking your kids, are you having fun? Hey, did you have a good practice today? And your kids well enough when they say, yeah, it was a good practice, versus, yeah, really had a great time today. So I think letting them know that you're engaged with them, that you truly want to know, are they having fun? And if they say, yeah, I'm saying, oh, well, what's really fun? Oh, I made some new friends. Oh, that's great. Or, we're planning for the championship. So I think being supportive for them is really important. And it's not like you're only there to praise them when they do well, when they make the starting lineup. Yes, you can say, oh, that's great. You're going to start next week. Or, if they're not starting, say, it's really important. Every team really needs players who maybe aren't starting, but to come in and to do, so to really show true support, and not to be critical of a coach or other players, but just focus on your child. Some of the things to look for is things like a child who doesn't seem to enjoy it, doesn't want to go to practices. Well, I don't, my stomach hurts, I don't want to go to the game. Avoidance of practicing games tells you something's not going. It could be a relationship with coaches. I've had many athletes who've been very negatively affected by coaches who really had no business being involved with youth coaching. And others who, coaches have been almost like a second parent, and they really look up. So it can be a positive or a negative or a neutral. So I think asking about that, a child who doesn't seem to be enjoying it anymore, who after the game, they should feel, effervescent, hey, that was really a good practice. And if they're not, asking about that. Other symptoms you can look for are changes in concentration, maybe just not enjoying other things in life, not wanting to engage in family-related activities, maybe not enjoying, getting online, or things that they used to do that brought them to changes in sleep. Some of the classic changes in appetite. What we tend to see is, some of these kids, depending on their age, where they're at, maybe a bit more irritable than they used to be. Kind of, it's like they just don't seem to be themselves, but in a negative way. Not like, oh, they don't seem to be themselves. They're so focused. They're bringing home, all A's. And, and I've actually seen that many athletes will do much better when they're in season because their life is more structured. Right. They don't have time to spend 3 hours on social media. They've got practice. They got to come home, get their homework done. They need to keep their grades up to be able to continue to play. So I think some of the warning signs parents can look for is your kid looks different. They don't seem to be enjoying. And I think what every parent should do then is just ask in a non-confrontive way, saying, you don't seem to be enjoying it anymore. Something going on. Oh, well, this one player, is giving me a hard time, or the coach. So, being there to observe, to support, and to be engaged, and to let the child know that if they have a bad game or a bad practice or something, you're still going to love them. You know, you're there to support them. You want to help them. You want them to get the most out of sports that they can. And that, you know, even if they're not a starter, so, you know, there are things that you'll learn, like teamwork. This will make you a better person in life, whatever you go into, whatever you know, whether you go to college or not go to college, that to emphasize the positive aspects, to be supportive of them. And if they're not, and to say, you know, as a parent, I think you've won every time you give your best effort, whatever you're able to give. You know, you're not always going to do your best every day. Nobody does that in any walk of life, but let them know that it's important to try to do their best, but it's important to enjoy what they're doing.
So it sounds like the most important thing as a parent, when you see some of these red flags, is start with a conversation with your child and engage them and dive deeper into what's going on. Do you have any other recommendations for things that parents can do to help if they do identify some of those red flags?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Having the conversation, knowing your kid. I think in general, I've seen parents who I know were trying to look out for the best interests of their child, but they would go to the coach and say, you know, why isn't my kid starting, blah, blah, blah. And many kids actually get embarrassed by that. They don't want to feel, and they don't want their teammates to feel like, well, I'm starting because my mom or dad, you know, made a big issue about that. Most kids want to feel like they've earned it. So I think for the parents, it's important to show the balance of total support for your child. Now, if something is going on that you don't agree with, then I think by all means, you know, call the coach and say, you know, I've seen something, but I think kids, and again, it varies a little bit, you know, the 5-6-year-old is different than the 10-12-year-olds, is different than the early teens and the later teens. So it varies a bit, but I think parents I think what they should be focusing on is, what can I do to make this a more enjoyable and positive experience for my child, because it'll be a more positive experience for you. If parents are stressed out, you know, you read about these parents getting in fist fights at games or practices. I mean, even with youth sport, I saw this. My wife ran a very large youth soccer program, like 1,500 kids in the Philadelphia area. So, you know, and it started from age 3 or 4 up to age 16. So I think parents need to keep that perspective of, this is about the physical and emotional and mental growth and development of my child, and it will be a far better experience if they're happy with it. So try to keep the pressure down. You know, we've got a big game coming up. Well, that's good, a big game. You know, you want to work hard, but you know what? You know, it's not make it like if they lose somehow, you know, the child feels like they have disappointed or they've let them, and then they'll sometimes get angry and frustrated. So keeping that positive attitude, but yet saying, you know, that it's something that you can share in a positive way with your child. It gets a bit more challenging when they get into those teen years, because you know, they're dealing with identifying more with their peer group than necessarily parents. But I've seen a lot of teenage athletes who actually stay more connected with parents who show an interest and are out there and they want to be supportive.
Sure, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the parent side of things and how they can best support their kids. What about schools? And I'd say both high schools and colleges and universities, what can they do to best support these student athletes? And I guess that could be all aspects, because, you know, you have a whole range of people who are involved in this, whether it be directly the coaches, or even whether it be like an academic dean, or even someone in more of an even higher administrative position in a university. What would you love to see to really support these students?
Well, we finished just a 5-year. We were doing a 5-year prospective, following kids ongoing for 5 years in youth sports concussion, doing a lot of advanced neuroimaging to try to see what's actually going on, to learn more about it, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. You know, Ridley Scott's film Concussion, I had a big discussion with him that, you know, it wasn't really a fair and accurate description in many ways. And his response to me is, Doc, I'm not trying to make a documentary, I'm trying to make a Hollywood movie. And I actually spoke to Will Smith, who's from my hometown in Philadelphia, whose kid had some sports concussions playing football. So in that 5-year study, we were working with the high school, and I had terrific support from the principal, the athletic director, and the head coaches. So I've done a fair amount of work with the NCAA and with universities, and a number of the ones I've been at over the years, and done some consulting for the NCAA for their mental health division. Where I think it's important is it really does start from the top down. So if you can get a high school principal to just say, yeah, this is important. And this high school that we work with, she was terrific. But what I want from them is just to say this is important. Really, I think you're looking at the athletic director, because the athletic director, and I've had good success with many of the athletic directors I've worked with, either in a high school level or at the collegiate level, is for the athletic director to say to all of the coaches, this is what I expect. I expect, we're not going to tolerate some of the bad things that we've heard about with coaches. Yes, we want to win, but this is about the development of young men and women, particularly in high school, preparing them for life, not just for a college career. Some of them will get that. The overwhelming majority aren't. Right. So I think it's the leadership. If the AD speaks to the coaches, and the AD at our schools would be with the coaches at the beginning of the year and say, this is the way I want this to be done. This is the behavior. We see, in the workplace, we have all these, discrimination. You've got to go through all that training now. High school do as well. I think it's the same thing in sports, is to make sure that we don't want to have coaches feel like they've got to be surrogate mental health providers. That's not it at all. Right. But they should be aware of the important role they play in the development. They should take responsibility to tell their teams that they're not going to tolerate, bullying. And this happens, cliques develop in high school, and somebody gets, maybe they're a little bit different, whether they're dressed, whatever it might be. It's really the coach's responsibility at the high school level to make sure that hey, we're a team, and a team stays together. And I think the coach can really set the tenure, particularly in high schools. When you get to college and start to expand a bit more, you can get, athletic trainers are oftentimes involved, and the athletes feel comfortable talking with them. But I think it really is a kind of a top-down saying, this is the behavior that's acceptable, and also educating them on the signs to look for. A kid who starts missing practices, who really never did, who doesn't seem to be performing at the level that they usually do. Mm-hmm. Maybe the teammates come and say, yeah, Sally or Joe, I'm a little concerned about them. So just not being there to be a diagnostician or to treat it, but to be aware of changes in behavior or performance might be indicative. And it's not your role to go in and say, but maybe to bring a player in and say, geez, I noticed you don't seem to quite be yourself. Is everything okay? Mm-hmm. And some athletes will talk about it, some won't, but sometimes it's just important to say, if things aren't going so well, I'm concerned about you, not only as an athlete, but as a young man or woman on this team. And I want you to be aware of, if you need to talk to somebody, you don't have to tell me, but here are some resources so the kids know. And I like doing it with the whole team at the beginning, rather than, because no athlete likes to feel like they've got a mental issue going on. Right. They'll talk about, a sprain or a break or sore muscles. Mental health we're still dealing with, and we've seen a big improvement when you have like Michael Phelps or Simone Biles coming out. Hey, it's okay to not be okay. So we're actually starting to turn the corner a bit on the important role of mental health in sports, which is a big deal, big part of what I do internationally now. So I think that's where it is really educating all the stakeholders in the world of sport at whatever level on understanding the important, what are some of the things to look for? And again, a lack of enjoyment, maybe a change in performance, change. This person used to be, she would go to all the, maybe not going to team events. Oh, let's meet, with McDonald's, afterwards. So identify, and then having team captains, particularly in high school and then even in college, say, part of my role as a captain is I'm a captain for this whole team. The person who never plays and just barely made the team, as well as the superstar, and have everyone feel like that, part of enjoying sports, because an athlete who's having fun will always be an athlete who performs at a higher level. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like the community aspect is so important.
That's exactly
in creating the safe space for everyone.
It's not like you're the identified patient, but hey, it can be stressful. You got SATs coming up, or you got the prom coming up, or whatever it might be. But have the team is there for each other. It's that village effect, and it's okay to go talk to somebody and let people know who they can call anonymously. Maybe they don't want the whole team to know, maybe they don't want the coach to know, but setting that stage that, when things get stressful, and they do for everybody. And I use the COVID analogy. Look at how many people were stressed with COVID. Didn't mean they had mental illness. It was a stressful time. Sports can have their stressful times as well. And I think that's where, if we get the coaches and the senior stakeholders that I think can create that environment, and then have a coach like, hey, listen, look what happened with Phelps and Simone, and you can go on a long list of professional and Olympic athletes. And I think that can go a long way in maintaining a healthy emotional and mental environment for athletes of all ages.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are some critical resources that student athletes need access to ensure their safety and well-being?
Well, I think they need to know where is a safe and confidential place they can go if they're having troubles. Many of the schools have a school psychologist. I believe it's important that if you are a school psychologist, you're very much aware of what to look for, because dealing with athletes can be a little bit different than dealing with some of the emotional and mental challenges that people who aren't athletes might be dealing with,
Right.
substance abuse issues, for example. So I think having them know that where they can go, that it is okay. I know my wife is telling me, for the first time in 40 years as being a youth coach, she had one of her players, one of her co-captains last year, came up and say, "Hey, coach, I just need to take a mental health day." And she's never heard that. And she said, "Hey, that's great. Take your day and come back and be stronger." So that's, I think, part of the culture that is, we still got a ways to go, but is improving.
Yeah.
And it's not just at the highest levels. It actually goes down, down to really to youth sports, and having people understand the presentation and being there, and to say, sports should be about having fun and enjoying. And it's not like you're only having fun when you're winning. It's when you're going out and giving your best effort and bonding with your teammates. Make that be the night of fun and enjoyment, not just winning.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. David Barron from Western University of Health Sciences, for all of this helpful information for what to look for and how to support student athletes better. Also, thank you to all of our viewers and listeners, and to our sponsor, Annapolis Pediatrics. Make sure that you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.